Hey everyone, Luke here, and this week I got for you this commission custom pet portrait. A client reached out to me that they wanted to get a little piece just to remember their late bulldog Tank, and it's something I'm more than happy to do. So without further ado, why don't we jump in and I'll take you through the painting process of this guy right here. If you're new here, thanks for clicking on the video. Every week I like to go through one of the paintings that I've done throughout the week, maybe talk about it or talk about something else that's on my mind. So if that interests you, or if you really like the video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the little bell notification to get notified as soon as I drop a new video. So what you're seeing here is my underpainting. What I like to do is do an acrylic underpainting to sort of establish some of the light and dark values. Now, this is to help me organize my thoughts a little bit as I get into the painting process, but one of the other main reasons too is that some of this underpainting is going to show through to the final product, and it's going to reinforce some of the aspects of the painting, especially with this little stuffed animal toy that you'll see at the bottom here. I'll talk a little bit about that more in detail when that comes up. Now, like I was mentioning, this is a custom pet portrait, and in the original reference photo, instead of this stuffed animal that you'll see that Tank's laying on, it was actually a foot there. And so what the client came up with is to actually replace her foot with Tank's favorite stuffed animal. Now, unfortunately, I didn't record any of the Photoshop work that I did. If that is something that you all are interested in, I'd be more than happy to try and figure out a way how to record that and show you the process and how I do some of my rough drafts. So let me know down in the comments if that is something that interests you. Now, as always, I do like to start in the high detail areas and mainly being the eyes. With a commission portrait, the eyes I find are the most important thing. So I tend to spend a long time on them, making sure I get them exactly right. So taking that little bit of extra care when working around the eyes here. After rendering some of that more finer detail, I like to go to a bigger brush and start to block in some of the bigger areas on the dog. Now, I'm not going to lie, in this piece, I did get caught up a little bit in the details. Thankfully, it didn't compromise the piece at all. It actually turned out really, really well. But I did switch to a smaller brush a little bit more frequently than I would have liked to normally. But thankfully, like I said, it turned out really, really well, and I was happy with it. So I'm using this like really cheap brush here, and the reason why is I bought some professional brushes like a year ago, and when I bought them, they didn't have the size I was looking for. They had something like 3 and then like a 7 or 3 and a 5 or something like that. So anyways, this is the only size I have in between my big brush and my small brush. So I am using this really, really cheap brush, but honestly, it gets the job done. This is something that I don't think is talked about a lot, but it's not always about like using these really expensive tools. I've used cheap brushes for like the majority of my painting career, and I've only just recently switched over to what we would call like quote unquote professional brushes. And honestly, I wouldn't have known the difference between a professional brush and a beginner brush if I hadn't have spent so much time in the beginning using cheaper brushes. So what you're noticing, or may not be noticing, is in these areas right here around the eye sockets, I'm really being cautious of how I'm using my brush strokes. I'm really trying to show sort of the contour lines of the structure of the bulldog. You know, bulldogs have this really distinct blocky head to them, this really powerful head, and they got a really powerful jaw system. And so in the way that I'm applying paint, I'm trying to think of how his eyes go in a little bit there and to sort of accentuate it a little bit. Now, one of the problems, again, back with this brush is I only have one of them. Typically, I would like to have 2 or 3 brushes of the same size, and the main reason for that is I like to keep some brushes for the lighter values and some brushes for the darker values. And the reason for that is when you're mixing up paint, let's say, for example, right here, I'm using this smaller brush that has a really light value, and then I wanted to pick a dark area, like right here on the nose, you would make the paint sort of like milky. You would lose the richness of the paint that you mixed. So it's a good idea to have multiple brushes of the same size and have them ones for the dark value and ones for the light value. So the nose on this piece was a little bit tricky. In the original reference photo, his nose was actually a little bit dried out. So the client asked me if I could darken up his nose a little bit, which is of course no problem whatsoever. But Bulldog's noses are a little bit flat, and I got a little bit lost in doing this. So what I decided to do was like go back to the fundamentals and just focus on shapes and values. And it's really funny how when you get stuck in an area, how you can kind of just go back to your fundamentals and they'll carry you through. And it's funny because I found the nose was one of the hardest parts about this piece. And when I posted it on my Instagram, somebody actually commented how much they liked it. So it just goes to show that even sometimes when you're struggling on a spot, somebody may actually end up liking it. So I'm just finishing up on the last little bit of the snout here by adding a little bit of the cast shadow onto the stuffed animal, and then adding in this nice little warm spot that's on the bottom of Tank's chin there. So what you'll start to notice in this area right here is that even though it's kind of like a flat value, I'm still being really cautious of where I'm putting my brush strokes down. I don't want to blend it all together. I still want there to be a little bit of brushwork in, but I don't want it to appear like it's just one flat value there, because that will flatten the image out quite a bit. And this right here is my favorite thing. It's the scratching out. I'm taking my palette knife here and just scratching out some of the finer details. The only tricky thing about this is that the paint needs to be pretty wet when you're doing it. But I am so happy I found this technique. It has made doing whiskers and some of the finer details so much easier on a painting. So one of the things that I liked the most about this reference photo was his paw right here. It's very foreshortened. It's almost like it's reaching towards the viewer. I love when there's stuff like this in the reference photos because it adds so much depth to the painting. You're going to see in the final product, and even when I zoom out here, it really does look like the dog is reaching out to you. And the cool thing is that it's probably pretty close to life size, if not a little bit bigger. And it just adds this such depth to the piece. I really like when I get to paint something super foreshortened like that. So now we're getting into the stuffed animal here, and this is where that underpainting is really going to shine. I like to follow this rule of darks are transparent and lights are opaque. So you're going to see here I'm not very careful with my brushwork, and I'm actually trying to scratch out some of the black that I'm putting in here. And the reason is I'm really trying to get some of that underpainting to show through. It's going to add so much depth to that dark and without flattening the image. As well as right here, I'm trying to soften this edges, so I'm not being very cautious with it. I find that the shadows look so much better when they're soft and blended in, versus right here when I'm putting in some of the lighter values, they look a lot better when they're sort of cut out and sharp edges. Now, one thing that can be really tricky for a lot of people is when it comes to painting lighter values or something that would be quote unquote white. So for example, this is a stuffed animal that's white and black. The problem is that if you think that it's white, you're pretty tempted to just use white paint out of the tube, and that is just going to be totally wrong. So I know here it looks like it's completely white, but trust me, it's quite beige in person. And the thing is when you get into these areas of extreme light or extreme dark, your mind's going to want to cheat and to just use like a pure plain white. But do yourself a favor, make sure you double, triple check the values, because this is where it can make or break in a painting. Now, one thing that's a little bit different that you may notice from some of my other paintings is that I didn't paint the background first and then the head over top of it. So working like back to front. The main reason why I did that in this case is because for two reasons. Number one, bulldogs are short-haired dogs, and number two, bulldogs have really strong features about them. So one way to sort of illustrate strength is to have really sharp edges. So you'll notice, like maybe in some comic books and stuff like that, that the main strong figures, male or female, doesn't matter. Just the symbol of strength, they'll have really strong edges to them. And for pets, it's pretty much the same thing. If you want to sort of illustrate strength, you kind of have these really strong edges. So what I'm doing when I'm painting this background is I'm sort of cutting away some of the ear. So I purposely painted the ear bigger than it was to come back later to cut away at it. For the final part of this painting, being the sort of hind of the dog, I wanted to make sure that it was very soft and blended together here. It's out of focus, and one way to do that in painting is to sort of blend it all together, and especially sort of blend it into the background here. And so here's the final painting. I really enjoyed doing this one. It was a lot of fun. I love doing custom pet portraits. It definitely puts me to work, makes me think outside of the box, and adding the stuffed animal in was a lot of fun. The client was super happy with the finished product, and that always is very rewarding after doing a big piece like this. So I just want to thank you all for watching. If you liked the video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and hit the little bell notification to get notified as soon as I drop a new video. Thanks again for watching, and hope you all take care.